Fats Domino passed away yesterday in his Louisiana home at the age of 89, a quiet end for a man who helped ignite an entire musical revolution. His sound shaped rock and roll itself. But today's story goes far beyond one legend. It reaches into the shadows of black music history, where tragedy struck some of the greatest groups of the 1970s, and hardly anyone ever knew. Think back to the era of pure soul. The OJs, the Stylistics, the Emotions, voices so powerful they set America on fire. But behind the bright lights and screaming fans, a haunting pattern unfolded, a pattern no one ever connected. One group's tour van flipped just days after signing a $1 million contract. Another disappeared from the charts forever following a shocking backstage incident no newspaper dared to print. Some voices were silenced before their prime. Some lives ended quietly, without headlines, without justice. Was it coincidence? A curse? Or something far darker that the industry never wanted revealed? Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the untold tragedies that struck 20 black music groups in the 1970s, accidents so devastating they nearly erased entire careers from history. The truth has been buried for decades. Until now. 1. The Sequence. One last hit and a silent coffin. The Sequence weren't just trailblazers, they were the first all-black female group to blast hip-hop onto US radio. 3 young women who dared to believe the world would listen. But their story, which began with rhythm, sisterhood, and fire, ended decades later on a blood-stained night with no time for goodbyes. In March 2025, Angie Stone, the deep, growling voice that anchored the Sequence, walked onto the stage in Atlanta for a tribute honoring the women who built hip-hop before anyone cared to give them credit. At 63, she was still magnetic, fierce stance, husky vocals, eyes that held every triumph and heartbreak she had survived. When she belted out "Funk You Up," the crowd rose like a wave, honoring the song that in 1980 made the Sequence the first female hip-hop group to ever hit Billboard. After the show, Angie stepped into a car heading out of downtown. She never made it home. At the intersection of Cascade Road and Benjamin E. Mays Drive, an SUV blew through a red light and slammed directly into the passenger side, the side where Angie sat. The force spun the car violently before it crumpled against a lamppost. Angie was trapped inside, unconscious, her head pressed against the shattered window as twisted metal pinned her in place. Rescue crews fought for nearly 20 minutes to free her. At Grady Memorial Hospital, doctors pushed through emergency surgery, but the damage was too catastrophic. Angie Stone died at 3:42 a.m. from a ruptured aorta and devastating chest trauma. The hip-hop world mourned as her 2 sisters in sound, Cheryl the Pearl Cook and Gwendolyn Blondie Chisholm, wept over her casket. Someone placed a vinyl of "Funk You Up" on top, along with an old black and white photo of the trio when they were young, fearless, and unstoppable. There were no reunion plans now, no future stages. Angie's death became the final, heartbreaking note of a group that once opened the door for every woman in hip-hop and left behind a silence no rhythm could ever fill. 2. The Bar-Kays, the flight that never landed. If we had to begin with one group whose destiny shattered at the very height of their rise, no tragedy cuts deeper than the story of the Bar-Kays. They were young men from Memphis, barely out of their teens, still glowing with the electricity of dreams too fresh to doubt. Their breakout hit, Soulfinger, wasn't just a song. It was a riot of joy, a blazing funk instrumental so alive it didn't need a single lyric. It announced them to the world with brass swagger and the kind of youthful fire that makes you believe tomorrow will always wait for you. In 1967, everything changed overnight. 1 minute, they were high school musicians playing in garages and small local venues. The next, they were chosen as the backing band for Otis Redding, the King of Soul, the man whose voice could melt an audience in seconds. To stand behind Otis on stage wasn't simply an honor, it was a coronation. A dream they had never even dared to whisper aloud was suddenly their new reality. They hit the road bursting with hope, instruments packed, jokes flying, minds full of futures they hadn't even mapped out yet. The world felt wide, open, and ready. And then, in a single cruel moment, everything ended. On December 10, 1967, Otis Redding and members of the Bar-Kays boarded a Beechcraft 18 headed for Madison, Wisconsin. Snow covered the ground. Ice clung to the lake below. As the plane descended, something went wrong, fast, silent, and irreversible. Just a few kilometers from the airport, the aircraft plunged out of the sky and crashed into the frozen waters of Lake Monona. The impact ripped the plane apart. There were no radio calls, no screams, no chance to brace. The lake swallowed everything in seconds. Otis Redding died instantly. So did 4 of the Bar-Kays' young men whose brightest days were still ahead. Only one person on that plane survived: Ben Cauley, the group's trumpet player. When Ben opened his eyes, he was floating alone in the freezing black water, clinging desperately to a seat cushion. The cold cut through him like knives. His breath was shallow. His trumpet, the symbol of his youth, his gift, his pride, drifted lifelessly beside him. A single memory pulsed through his fading consciousness. Otis reaching over moments before impact, gripping his hand. No words, just a look, one that seemed to hold fear, gratitude, and an unspoken goodbye all at once. Ben survived only because he had not fastened his seatbelt. A simple, careless mistake. The kind of thing people tease you about. That tiny act flung him clear of the wreckage, saving the life that should have been lost with the rest. Meanwhile, James Alexander, the only Bar-Kays member not on the flight because he had stayed behind to rent a car, waited at the airport. As he looked toward the runway, he saw people gathering at the glass pointing toward the lake. Smoke curled upward from the frozen surface. His heart tightened. He didn't know what had happened yet, but instinct screamed the truth. Everyone he loved was gone. 3 days earlier, Otis had finished recording sitting on the dock of the bay. When it was released, it sounded like a message from somewhere beyond life, a gentle farewell carried on the tide. It became the first posthumous #1 hit in music history. The Bar-Kays could not go on. Not then. Not after a loss so violent it erased nearly everything they were. Years later, James rebuilt the group with new members, but every time they stepped onto a stage, he honored the past. One spot was always left empty, a silent space for the brothers who never made it home. 3. KC and the Sunshine Band, Tragedy from the Cold Sound of a Bulldozer. As one of the defining forces of 1970s disco funk, KC and the Sunshine Band turned dance floors into electrified battlegrounds of joy. Their horns blasted like sirens, the rhythms were fire, and classics like Get Down Tonight and That's the Way I Like It became anthems in black clubs across America. But hidden beneath the shine, the groove, and the glittering stage lights was a quiet genius, Jerome Smith, the guitarist whose sharp, nimble riffs stitched every hit together. He didn't need the spotlight. His guitar was the spotlight. His rhythm was the group's pulse. Then came July 28, 2000, the day the music stopped. At a construction site in West Palm Beach, Florida, Jerome slipped from the cabin of a bulldozer he was operating. The machine rolled over him, crushing him instantly. He was only 47. The man who once made the world dance died not as a star, but as a laborer covered in dust and steel. Yet the tragedy ran deeper than the accident itself. Years of painful royalty disputes had pushed Jerome out of the band he helped define. He never received a cent from reissued albums that continued to profit from his sound. 6 months before his death, he wrote a letter pleading for medical assistance, and no one ever answered. When officials recorded his occupation on the day his body was found, the form read, "Manual laborer." Nothing more. The news devastated KC and the Sunshine Band. They halted performances for nearly 2 years, when they finally returned, Jerome's original guitar solos were kept exactly as they were, untouchable, irreplaceable. Because after Jerome fell, many believed the band lost something they never got back, the heartbeat behind the sunshine. 4. Boogie Nights. The crash that changed everything. If the Bar-Kays fell from the sky while chasing their dreams, then Heatwave's tragedy came from the ground, sudden, brutal, and just as unforgettable. In 1977, Boogie Nights ruled every club in America. Its shimmering groove spread through black communities like electricity, and Always and Forever became the sacred wedding anthem of an entire generation. And at the heart of it all was Johnny Wilder Jr., Heatwave's angelic frontman, the man with a voice so tender people compared him to a young Marvin Gaye. No one could have imagined that only 2 years later the voice that lifted millions would belong to a man who could no longer lift his own hands. On a cold February night in 1979, after a show in Dayton, Ohio, Johnny was driving his brother and girlfriend home. As they crossed the intersection of 3rd and Main Street, a delivery truck barreled through a red light at nearly 55 miles per hour and smashed directly into Johnny's side. The world went white. The impact crushed his cervical spine, shattered nerves, and left him unconscious as paramedics fought to keep him alive. He slipped into the ICU in a near-vegetative state. When he finally opened his eyes, nothing below his neck responded. No movement, no sensation, no future as he knew it. Doctors spoke without mercy. "You'll never walk again, and you may never sing." But Johnny didn't sit weep. He didn't sit rage. He asked one question, soft, trembling, but unwavering: "Can I still sing?" And he did. Paralyzed from the neck down, Johnny Wilder Jr. wrote music by tapping notes with his chin, shaped melodies with faint breaths, and recorded vocals lying completely still. For 27 years he refused replacements, retreated from the spotlight, and kept creating until his final breath in 2006. On his desk, untouched, rest 2 unfinished songs, like melodies frozen at the moment life broke the beat. 5. The Dramatics, the contract that was never fulfilled. The Dramatics were once the crowned princes of soul sorrow, the men whose harmonies wrapped themselves around in the rain, what you see is what you get, and every heart that ever broke in silence. Their layered voices moved like thunderclouds and silk, shaping a sound that defined an era. But on a storm-soaked night in July 1975, at the height of their rise, fate took a violent turn that reshaped their destiny forever. That evening, the group's tour bus pulled out of Indianapolis, bound for Chicago for what was supposed to be the most important summer performance of their career. Rain hammered the windows, the mountain roads glistened with danger, and the driver, new, inexperienced, and confronting the storm of his life, lost control when the bus hydroplaned. The vehicle skidded violently, tipped sideways, and slammed into a concrete pillar at the roadside. In the dark belly of the bus, chaos erupted: screams, shattered glass, metal groaning like a wounded beast. L.J. Reynolds, the soulful backbone of their harmonies, suffered severe chest injuries that robbed him of his soaring high notes for nearly 2 years. Willie Ford shattered his hip and spent months confined to a wheelchair. Their manager slipped into a coma and hung between life and death. No lives were lost, yet something precious died that night. A piece of their youth, their confidence, their voice. What made the tragedy even crueler was the timing. Just hours earlier, the Dramatics had signed a performance contract with Isaac Hayes worth over $100,000, the dream deal they had chased for 7 relentless years. After the accident, the record label froze their album plans. The media barely blinked. The group went silent. It took 3 long years before they stepped back onto a stage, but fans could hear it instantly. Something in their voices never fully returned from that rain-soaked road. 6. The Ostes, the broken mirror backstage. In 1973, When Backstabbers ruled the Billboard charts and Love Train became an anthem of black unity and unstoppable hope, the OJs felt untouchable. They were kings of their moment, young, fearless, and certain the world would always bend to their rhythm. They didn't hire drivers. They didn't travel with assistants or managers. They took the wheel themselves, believing nothing could go wrong as long as they held the steering column. But on the night of September 14th, everything changed. Interstate 76 was slick with a thin layer of misty drizzle. The car, descending a gentle slope, suddenly lost control. The tires skidded, the headlights whipped sideways, and in a blink the vehicle flipped, sliding almost 80 meters across the wet asphalt. Metal screamed. Glass exploded. Time fractured. Inside the wreck, William Powell was crushed between two seat frames, his body pinned and motionless. Walter Williams slammed headfirst into the window and fell into unconsciousness. Only Eddie Levert crawled out unhurt, silent, trembling, and carrying the weight of a truth he would never fully escape. Because Eddie had been the one driving. He had switched seats moments earlier, joking that he wanted the thrill of taking the wheel. But when the record label learned of the crash, they panicked. Their new CBS contract was worth $500,000, too much to risk on scandal. They pressured police to list an unnamed technician as the driver in the official report. Eddie never confirmed it. He never denied it. He simply stopped driving forever. On every trip afterwards, he sat quietly in the back seat. Williams survived but was never the same. He forgot lyrics, missed high notes, and often stayed behind the curtain singing backup from the shadows. In 1977, as cancer claimed his life, the OJs performed that same night in Baltimore. No tribute, no moment of silence. The show went on because it had to. But backstage, before stepping out, Eddie Levert stared into the dressing room mirror for a long, aching moment, then punched it so hard it shattered like ice. And from that night on, everyone understood, some scars don't fade, some guilt becomes a lifetime companion. 7. Fats Domino Band. The crash that cut through the era of black rock. As the powerhouse behind one of rock and roll's most enduring legends, the Fats Domino Band carried the heartbeat of classics like Blueberry Hill, Ain't That a Shame, and I'm Walking. Through the 1950s and 60s, they weren't just musicians, they were a family, traveling the country with Fats Domino, blending harmony, loyalty, and raw emotion into every note they played. But on the night of September 18, 1970, everything changed in a flash of wet asphalt and twisted metal. After a show in Baton Rouge, 6 band members climbed into a van heading back to Slidell. Rain hammered the windshield, blurring the outlines of the Louisiana night. The roads glistened dangerously, slick as glass, as the van approached a curve on Highway 190. A truck from the opposite direction suddenly swerved across the lane. The impact was brutal and absolute. The van crumpled under the force of the head-on collision. In an instant, the music that had once lifted stadiums was replaced by silence. Clarence "Sonny" Fields, the band's veteran saxophonist, a man whose horn could make crowds rise to their feet, died on the spot. His saxophone, bent and broken, lay pressed against his chest as if he was still holding on to one last note. 3 other members were left critically injured. Fats Domino, who had taken a separate vehicle for an interview, received the news hours later. He didn't speak.
He couldn't.
He sat with his head in his hands, trembling, unable to form a single full sentence whenever Sonny's name was mentioned afterward. On September 23rd, Sonny was laid to rest in New Orleans, his damaged saxophone buried by his side. The band kept performing, but something sacred had been torn away. Every night the right side of the stage remained empty, a silent space for the musician who would never return. 8. The Temptations, the bullet without an explanation. The Temptations stand among the greatest soul groups in black music history, architects of Motown's golden age, creators of timeless anthems like My Girl Ain't Too Proud to Beg and Papa Was a Rollin' Stone. Their choreography was razor-sharp, their harmonies flawless, and their presence so commanding it felt almost militaristic in precision. But among those voices, one man carried the quiet heartbeat of the group: Paul Williams, a co-founder, the master of smooth choreography, and the owner of a warm, steady baritone. Paul was the soul beneath the spotlight, the one who kept the unit grounded when fame threatened to pull them apart. And yet, on August 17, 1973, Paul Williams was found alone in his car in an abandoned Detroit parking lot. A bullet wound marked his temple. A gun lay beside him. A half-empty liquor bottle sat on the passenger seat. Police said suicide, but the scene whispered a different story. There were no clear fingerprints on the weapon, no suicide note, no explanation for why a man so deeply woven into Motown history would meet his end like a forgotten stranger. The truth behind his fall was far more tragic. Paul had been quietly pushed out of performance contracts due to worsening health and aggressive alcoholism. Though a founding member, he never received royalties equal to the rest of the group. By the time of his death, he lived in a small rented home in East Detroit, struggling to pay his wife's medical bills. In desperation, he attempted to sell the recording of Feel Like Giving Up, a song whose title would later haunt those who knew him. After Paul's passing, the Temptations would sing on, but the magic of their classic lineup was gone forever. To Motown fans, Paul Williams wasn't just the choreographer or the baritone. He was the quiet sacrifice at the center of greatness, a legend who died unheard. 9. The Spinners. The fall from a 9-foot height. By 1974, the Spinners were no longer just a soul group. They were living monuments of black music, with I'll Be Around soaring across America and Then Came You lifting them into the highest ranks of soul royalty. The group seemed invincible, wrapped in the kind of glory only legends ever touch. But one October night at Philadelphia's Spectrum Theater shattered that illusion forever. Midway through their performance of One-of-a-Kind Love Affair, lead singer Bobby Smith stepped backward in a smooth, familiar move he had done hundreds of times before. What he didn't know, what no one knew, was that the rear stage platform had been removed for a lighting adjustment. One step, one miss, and Bobby plunged straight into a 9-foot pit beneath the stage. There was no scream, no warning. Only a heavy, hollow thud swallowed by music that continued for nearly 10 seconds before anyone realized something was wrong. When Eddie and the others rushed to the back, they found Bobby unconscious, his spine badly injured, his right leg numb and unresponsive. Paramedics rushed him to the ER, where he spent over 6 agonizing weeks in the hospital, followed by nearly a year of therapy just to stand and walk again. Then came the second blow. Organizers refused to pay his medical expenses, arguing the accident wasn't covered under stage liability. The Spinners were forced to cancel the remaining 17 tour dates, losing almost $200,000. But money wasn't the real loss. It was Bobby. He survived, but the soaring, effortless voice that had carried the Spinners into history was never the same. He needed help just to navigate stairs on stage, and from that night on, whenever the lights dimmed, every member of the Spinners instinctively glanced behind them, as if Bobby's fall still echoed in the air, refusing to fade into memory. 10. The Dells. The man who came back to life in a body bag. In the 1970s, the Dells were no longer chart-topping sensations, but to middle-aged black audiences across the Midwest, they were family. Their harmonies carried decades of wisdom, heartbreak, and the kind of love songs that felt like confessions whispered in the dark. They were seasoned, soulful, and still cherished everywhere they performed. But on a cold, rain-soaked March night in 1970, their story nearly ended, not just because of an accident, but because of an unforgivable neglect. At exactly 3:07 a.m. on March 12, After a show in Milwaukee, the group's tour bus slid on black ice and slammed into a frozen barrier on I-94. Metal screamed as the bus tipped onto its side, plunging the interior into chaos. Heavy sound equipment crashed forward, crushing seats in the back. The driver died instantly. 3 members were left critically injured. And then came the cruelest detail: it took rescue teams almost 40 minutes to arrive. Not because they were far, but because the wreck took place in a predominantly black neighborhood that officials routinely deprioritized. Among the bodies pulled from the wreckage was Michael McGill, the group's beloved bass vocalist. He wasn't breathing, he had no detectable pulse. A white intern doctor took one look, performed no thorough checks, and pronounced him dead on the spot. McGill's body was zipped into a bag and transported to the morgue. But 5 hours later, when a nurse unzipped the bag to check dental records, Michael suddenly gasped a long, desperate breath that shattered the silence. He was alive. Alive, but memoryless. For 3 weeks, he didn't know his own name. After that night, the Dells canceled tours for 5 years. They never stepped foot in Milwaukee again. Every new contract carried a mandatory clause: familiar drivers only. They rarely spoke about those hours in the cold darkness. They didn't need to. Because everyone understood, some survivals aren't miracles. They are rebellions, a reminder that black lives must not be forgotten, even when the world tries to bury them too soon. 11. The emotions. A stage accident and an unprecedented demand. The emotions, icons of elegance, femininity, and the timeless joy of Best of My Love, carried a secret wound that the world didn't learn about until long after the spotlight dimmed. On June 14, 1975, at the Baton Rouge Municipal Theater, the sister trio stepped onto the stage in flowing white silk gowns, glowing like celestial beings. Moments after opening with So I Can Love You, disaster struck. A side stage platform gave way, sending a 20-kilogram Fresnel light plummeting from 4 meters above. It slammed onto Sheila Hutchinson's right shoulder with bone-cracking force. But the summer tour was prepaid, and she pushed through each performance on painkillers, hiding agony behind perfect harmonies. Choreography was quietly rewritten. Movements softened. Fans never suspected a thing. The truth emerged a year later, in a Jet magazine backstage interview that stunned readers. From then on, the Emotions demanded their own stage engineer and banned prefab rigs, a groundbreaking stance for any female soul-funk act. 12. The Cheelites. A cheap rental and a voice shattered like glass. At their mid-70s peak, the Cheelites were Chicago's crowned soul kings, their haunting classic Have You Seen Her drifting through every radio across the Midwest. But even royalty can't outrun fate. In November 1976, while heading to a Cleveland show, the group traveled in a bargain rental van, one without proper plates, one they never should have been given. Cold rain slicked the lanes of I-71, and the van suddenly skidded, spun sideways, and flipped. Marshall Thompson was thrown from the front seat. His head slammed into the windshield, and a jagged shard of glass carved through his right eye. He survived, but his vision dimmed forever, reduced by nearly 40%. Then came the second blow. Insurance refused to pay a cent because the vehicle's paperwork was incomplete. The Cheelites were forced to cancel 12 shows and shoulder more than $70,000 in medical bills. From that day on, Marshall's trademark dark glasses weren't for fashion. They hid the eye that constantly wept. And every time he sang Have You Seen Her, he could barely see the crowd he was calling out to. 13. The Isley Brothers. The rollover and the will written in silence. In the 1970s, the Isley Brothers were the beating R&B rock soul of America, veterans of endless tours and roaring crowds. But in May 1979, while crossing a lonely stretch of Tennessee mountains in their RV, fate struck without warning. A deer darted across the road. The driver swerved. and the vehicle rolled 3 violent times down a narrow pass. Marvin Isley was thrown against the interior wall, fracturing a vertebra. Doctors strapped him into a rigid brace and warned he might never walk again. But the deepest wound came not from the crash, but from what happened afterward. That night, as Marvin lay unconscious in a hospital bed, Ronald Isley sat at his side in the dim glow of a plastic lamp. Silently, he wrote a will dividing all band profits equally among the 6 brothers, not as preparation for death, but as protection in case the band's youngest soul never rose from that bed. Marvin survived, but he never sat by a window in a vehicle again, and on every tour that followed, Ronald carried that folded will in his jacket pocket, a reminder that even music's power has limits, and family must speak for you when you cannot. 14. Earth, Wind and Fire, The Falling Lights, and a mic never cleaned of blood. Earth, Wind and Fire weren't just funk royalty, they were architects of spectacle, the first to fuse airborne stages, swirling lights, and cosmic theatrics into a single living performance. But in June 1975, during a Denver concert, that very innovation nearly silenced their brightest voice. As the band erupted into Shining Star, an 18 kDU lighting fixture tore loose from the ceiling. In a split second, it plummeted toward the stage and crashed directly onto Philip Bailey's left shoulder. The music stopped cold. The crowd screamed. Blood poured down Bailey's arm, soaking the gold microphone he still refused to drop. Emergency surgery saved the limb, but not the full range of movement. Bailey spent months relearning how to lift his arm, and even now he can't raise his left hand above shoulder height. From that night forward, a hidden stagehand has always stood ready to hold his mic in place, and the blood-stained gold microphone remains sealed in the studio, untouched, unpolished. Maurice White once explained, "We kept it because the light didn't break him. It reminded us how close we came to losing our voice." 15. The Manhattans, The Fall That Derailed a Tour. The Manhattans, masters of velvet ballads like Kiss and Say Goodbye, carried a stage presence so smooth it felt like watching a slow-motion black-and-white romance. Every note, every step, every harmony was elegance in motion. But on an August night in 1976 in Cleveland, elegance turned to calamity. As they eased into Shining Star, a brand-new fog machine misfired. Instead of a gentle mist, it blasted a dense white cloud across the edge of the stage, ironically on the lyric, "This has got to be the saddest day." Inside that blinding haze, lead singer Gerald Alston unknowingly stepped forward and vanished. He fell nearly 2 meters into an open tech pit beneath the stage. The music continued. The crowd applauded. They thought it was choreography. Gerald lay unconscious, lit only by stage bulbs humming above him. He survived, but with a mild head injury and a shattered sense of safety. For 8 months, he refused to perform. The band canceled almost 20 shows. From that night onward, the Manhattan Sits contract included a non-negotiable clause: no fog, no haze, only clear, golden light, because one artificial cloud left a scar that never fully cleared. 16. The Delfonics, a swerve to dodge paparazzi. The Delfonics, Philly's velvet-voiced soul pop kings, once floated through the charts with the elegance of royalty. With classics like I Love You and Didn't I Blow Your Mind This Time, they earned the nickname the Black Beatles, masters of tenderness, harmony, and pure musical finesse. But on a damp September night in 1977, their world nearly shattered. Moments after stepping off stage at the Spectrum Arena, still glowing from a roaring crowd, the group climbed into their 7-seat van. As they crossed the Benjamin Franklin Bridge, 2 paparazzi on motorbikes began tailing them, weaving recklessly through drizzle and glare. When one swerved too close, their driver jerked the wheel to avoid impact. The van skidded violently, slammed into the guardrail, and screeched to a stop, just 80 centimeters from plunging into the river below. Wilbert Hart was hurled forward, fracturing his collarbone and splitting his forehead, his fresh stage outfit soaked in blood. Touring halted instantly. A strict 6-month gag order followed. And from that night on, the Delfonics never left an evening show without a police escort, a quiet turning point that dimmed their golden glow forever. 17. The Commodores. A misstep and a hand that never touched the keys again. No one expected a single misstep to fracture a brotherhood, but that's exactly what happened to the Commodores in July 1978. The same summer, 3 Times a Lady ruled the Billboard charts. Backstage at a Texas show, during a rushed stage transition, keyboardist Milan Williams stepped onto what he thought was a secure platform. It wasn't. The flooring was unfinished, and he plummeted 1.4 meters onto exposed iron beams. The impact shattered his wrist, tore his ligaments, and splattered blood across the stage he had spent years commanding. Doctors worked fast, stitching him up with 54 sutures, but no amount of surgery could return the delicate control his fingers once had. Milan's solos disappeared. His rhythm faded. So when Lionel Richie later broke away to pursue his solo career, Milan slipped out too, quietly, painfully. No celebration, no statement. In one of his few interviews, he summed it up with a single haunting line. They called it an accident, but to me it was a goodbye without a signature. 18. The Ohio Players, 90 Minutes in the Dark. Funk renegades, the Ohio Players, the geniuses behind Fire and Love roller coaster, built their fame on heat, scorching brass, sweaty shows, and unstoppable swagger. But on a brutal winter night in 1974, it wasn't fire that almost broke them. It was the cold. Just before a gig near the Met Center in Minneapolis, 3 band members stepped into an elevator headed to the green room. At that same moment, a violent blizzard ripped through the city, snapping power lines and plunging the building into darkness. Outside, it was 2 degrees. Inside the elevator, it was worse. No lights, no heat, no ventilation. Trapped in pitch-black silence, they waited and waited. 90 minutes dragged by as staff assumed the group had slipped out through a side door. Clarence Satchel eventually collapsed from lack of oxygen, later spending 3 days in medical isolation. It became one of the rare nights the Ohio Players were forced to cancel a show. After that, the band swore off old hotel elevators and traveled with their own tour safety monitor, a reminder that the only thing that ever stopped them wasn't fire, but the freezing grip of winter. 19. The Stylistics, a burnt suit and a lingering shadow. If the Manhattans were haunted by fog, then the Stylistics were cursed by rain, the kind of rain that arrives just when life finally seems to be turning around. This legendary Philadelphia soul group, powered by Russell Tompkins Jr. S angelic falsetto, once ruled romance itself. You Make Me Feel Brand New, Stop, Look, Listen, and Betcha, by golly. Wow weren't just hits, they were soundtracks to millions of love stories. But in 1977, fate struck on a lonely stretch of interstate. Their touring van hydroplaned on a rain-slick highway, skidding across the asphalt before smashing into a guardrail with terrifying force. One member cracked his pelvis. The others were pinned inside the wreckage for more than 30 agonizing minutes, while rescuers fought the storm to reach them. Everyone survived, but something inside the group didn't. In the chaos, a fallen amp burst into flames and destroyed their brand-new stage suits, the first they had been able to buy after 5 long years of sharing outfits. To them, it felt like a cruel sign. No matter how hard they pushed, the spotlight kept slipping away. The tour collapsed, their label cut budgets, and the Stylistics quietly withdrew from the US scene, carrying an unspoken scar they never discussed publicly again. 20. The Pointer Sisters, a chance that never came back. The Pointer Sisters, known for their bold style and seamless jumps from jazz to disco, were rising fast in the late 70s. But on a quiet Sunday morning in 1978, their momentum was shaken by a single violent moment. On March 5th, they were headed to the Oakland Black Family Benefit Concert, an event supporting underprivileged black children. Their spirits were high, the day felt hopeful, until they reached the intersection of East 14th Street and 66th Avenue. A fire truck from Station 18 suddenly made a sharp U-turn while racing to an emergency. Their hired driver hit the brakes, but not fast enough. The collision was light, almost harmless, yet the damage was immediate. Ruth Pointer, unbelted in the front seat, was thrown into the windshield. Her left cheek split open, requiring 6 stitches. Blood covered her outfit, and shock left her silent. She missed 2 weeks of performances. Worse, the group had to forfeit their March 10th Soul Train taping, the biggest promotional moment they had lined up that year. Afterward, the sisters changed everything. They traveled only with trusted drivers, reviewed insurance policies themselves, and supported organizations protecting black performers on the road. The accident didn't stop them, but it permanently reshaped how they survived. And that brings us to the end of this powerful journey through 20 stories. The world almost forgot, tragedies that shaped a generation but were nearly erased from history. If one group's fate touched you or a single moment still lingers in your mind, let us know in the comments. Your voice keeps these legends alive. Before you go, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. More hidden truths, forgotten legends, and untold mysteries are on the way. Don't miss what's coming next.